Thank you for joining me today. I'm Minda Tracy and I'll be taking you through an action-packed session where I build not one but two dashboards using Power BI. Now I'm going to use the free Power BI desktop tool to get some CSV files from a SharePoint folder using Power Query, which is built into Power BI desktop. Then I'll use the Power Pivot modeling tools, which are also built into Power BI desktop, to create relationships between the data before creating the dashboards that you see behind me. Now I've got a lot to cover, so the pace will be too fast for you to take notes. Instead, I'll be emailing you after the webinar ends with a link where you can download the video recording of the webinar and the Power BI desktop file and CSV files containing the data, so you can have a go yourself. Now before we get started, I just want to cover a bit of housekeeping. This will be best viewed on a full-size monitor because there's a lot to fit into a small area, so I don't recommend using a tablet or a phone. Okay, let's crack on because we've got a lot of material to get through. Before we dive in, I want to give you an overview of what Power BI is. It's a business analytics tool for visualizing and sharing insights. It allows us to get data from hundreds of sources using the same Power Query tool that's available in Excel. We then model that data with the same Power Pivot tool from Excel. And from there we create compelling interactive reports and dashboards. And then collaborate and share them with people inside and outside of our organization. And we can set it up to automatically refresh so there's no further maintenance required. And there are two main Power BI tools. We use the free Power BI desktop tool to get our data, model it, and then create the reports. We then publish them to the online Power BI service where we can collaborate and share them with our audience. Now the data we'll be working with is 10 years worth of student data spread over 10 separate CSV files, one for each year. I've saved it in an online SharePoint folder. I also have 10 years worth of staffing data spread over another 10 CSV files, and 10 years worth of school data spread over a further 10 CSV files. So now that we're familiar with the data, let's look at building our reports. Here I am in Power BI desktop. The first thing I need to do is get my data. On the Home tab in the External Data group, we have our Power Query tools. And as I said, this is the same Power Query tool you may be familiar with from Excel, except in Power BI the menu buttons have been collapsed down. Now I'm going to get data and I need to get it from a SharePoint folder. But first let me just show you in the More menu how many data sources we can actually get data from. And if I scroll down, you'll see there's lots of databases. We've got online sources. We've got various online services. And the list keeps on growing. They're adding more connectors all the time. So I need to get my data from a SharePoint folder. So we'll select that from the list and press connect. Now I need to paste in my site URL, which I already copied to my clipboard, and click OK. It gives me a preview of the files on that site. I'm going to edit. Now it opens the Power Query editor window separate to the Power BI desktop window. I'm just going to maximize it. And we have a list of all of the files. I want to create a separate table for staff, another for students, and another for schools. So I want to filter this list, and we'll start with a text filter, text that contains, and in here we just type staff.csv. I'll click OK, and that will filter the list, so now we only have the staff files. I'm going to click on the double down arrow to combine those CSV files. It brings up a preview based on the first file. I can choose a different one if I want, but the first file is fine. Detects the origin of the file, the delimiter, and the data type is based on the first 200 rows. I can change that if I need to, but that's fine for this purpose. And I can see the preview here that it's parsed the data into the separate columns correctly. So I'm happy to press OK. And Power Query is going to go away and get that data and bring it into a table. So this is a preview of my data. You can see the source name in the left column. Over here are the queries that it's automatically written, so I haven't needed to learn any of the coding behind Power Query. It's automatically done this for me. In fact, the only query I'm interested in is this one, so I'm going to collapse these folders and we'll work on this query here. So let's give it a name. We'll call it staff. And we need to extract the year information from this column because I don't have any other date fields. So we're going to use the file name to extract that year value. And for that, I can go to split column. Based on the number of characters, I just want the first 4 characters, but I could have split it based on the underscore. We'll do once as far left as possible and click OK. Now I don't need this column anymore, so I'm just selecting it and press the delete key. Double click to rename this year. And notice over here in the applied steps pane, it's recording all the steps that have been performed so far. Much like a macro gets recorded in Excel, in Power Query it records the steps so that when I update this data source with a new file, for example for the next year, it can run through all these steps automatically without me having to do any more work. All I need to do is refresh the query. Alright, I want to also give this column a new name. We'll call it gender, and I'm happy with that. Now I need to get 2 more tables, another one for the students, so I'm going to right click, new query, go to more, and we'll do SharePoint folder. So just going to rinse and repeat basically for the other data sources, one for students and one for schools. So we'll edit so that we can filter out the files that don't relate to students this time. Text filter that contains students.csv. Now it's important to know that Power Query is case sensitive, so you can't type in students with a capital S, it wouldn't filter them out, it wouldn't find them. Okay, and we'll combine the content. Gives me a preview again, looks correct, all the columns are parsed correctly, so I'll click OK. It generates another query for the second set of data. So let's call this students. And I'm just going to collapse this folder down so I don't need to worry about it. And we need to extract the year information from this column. So I'm going to split the column by number of characters, 4 to keep the year data, and click OK. Notice again it's recording all the steps that have been performed so far. Let's delete that column, we don't need it, and we'll rename this one year. And we'll rename this one gender. Okay, so we've got 2 tables, 1 more, new query, SharePoint folder, paste in my URL and click OK. I'll edit. And again, we're going to filter, this time for the school's CSV files. And we'll combine them. Preview looks correct, so I'll click OK. Okay, let's give our query a name. We'll call it schools. And I'll just collapse down this folder. Just makes it a bit more tidy and allows me to focus on the queries that I actually need to work with. So again, we're going to split the column. This time let's do it by delimiter because we can use the underscore as a delimiter and it's correctly detected it. And I just want the leftmost. It doesn't really matter in this instance because there's only one, but let's go with leftmost. It'll achieve the same result. Again, I don't need the source name to column, so we'll delete that. Let's rename this year. And we're good to go. So what we have here are 3 fact tables. These are the tables that have all our facts in them, all of the data that we want to summarize. It's transactional type data. But what we need is to be able to create visualizations that use data from all 3 of these tables. And for that, we need to relate them. And in order to relate the tables, we can create dimension tables, or DIM tables for short. So the fields that I want to relate the tables with are the year, the state, and the school sector. So I need to create dimension tables for these fields, 1 for each. So I'll start with school sector. I'm just going to right click and add as new query. And what that's going to do is generate a new query that's based on this schools table. So any changes to the schools table will be reflected in this new table here that's called schools sector at the moment. It will be my dimension table. And that way I don't need to maintain it. It's just going to automatically update. What I need in a dimension table is no duplicates. So I'm going to remove duplicates. And then because this is still a list, I then need to convert it into a table. So I'll click to table. I don't need to worry about this. I'll just click OK. And we'll call this table dim school sector. The names that we give our queries are the names that our tables will have in the Power BI model. So it's important that you give them names that are going to help you work with the data, be meaningful in your visualizations and the like. So let's rename this column. We'll call it sector. And let me change the data type to text. Now it's important that every column has the correct data type. We can't relate fields to one another where they contain different data types. So the sector field in this table must match the data type of the sector field in this table. So you can see this is ABC for text and this one's ABC for text. Now the next thing I want to do is I want to specify the sort order of these fields. Every time I use them in a visualization, I want government first, then Catholic, then independent. So I'm going to add a numeric column based on a condition. And this is much like writing an if formula in Excel, except we get this nice GUI that helps us build it. So this is going to be our sort order. And we're going to say if the sector equals government, then number it 1. We'll add a rule. So this is now becoming a nested if. If the sector equals Catholic, remember it's case sensitive, we'll give it 2, else 3, because there's only one left for independent, and that will be number 3. So we've got our sort order. We need to give it a data type, and it's a whole number. And that's all we need to do with this table. The next table we need to generate is the state and territory. So let me right click, add as a new query. Again, if we happen to get a new state or territory, pretty unlikely in this example, but if there was a new one added to our data set, then it would be automatically picked up. Again, we'll remove duplicates. When we create relationships in our data in the Power Pivot modeling side in Power BI, we need a unique value on one side of the relationship. So let's convert it to a table. I don't need to worry about that. And let's give this a new name. We'll call it dim states. We'll rename this states and we'll change the data type to text. And notice it's building all of these steps in my applied steps pane. I don't need to manually recreate this again if I need to update it for any reason. Okay, so these state names are quite long, some of them anyway, and I don't have a lot of room in my visuals, so I'd like to use the abbreviation for these states. So we're going to add a column from examples. So I'm going to give it one example for Australian Capital Territory, ACT, and then the next one will be NSW, New South Wales. And then it thinks it's detected the pattern, it's given me a suggestion. However, in Australia, unfortunately, our states don't follow a pure acronym style of abbreviation. So this one is NT, this one is QLD, SA, TAS, VIC, and WA. So I'm just using the column from examples to allow me to type them in. There's not many there, so it's just quick and easy for me to do it like that. Let's give it a name, we'll call it state, and that's done. So the last table we need, dimension table that is for the year. Now I could right click and add as new query, but I'm going to show you another way we can do this. So I'm just going to create a blank query because I just need a list of numbers. So that's pretty easy to generate. So 2008 ... 2018. So the ... tells Power Query to fill in the blanks and it generates me a list of years. We'll convert it to a table. I'll click OK. And let's call this dim dates. We'll give this a new name, year, and fix the data type to whole number. Now, of course, this won't dynamically grow because I've created it from a list that I've typed in, but I wanted to just show you that technique. If you were creating this in the real world, then you'd be better off to generate it based on your source data, right click add as new query, and that way the dates will get updated as your data source gets new data added to it. Okay, so we have our 3 fact tables and our 3 dimension tables. We're ready to load it to our Power Pivot model in Power BI. So I'm going to click Close and Apply. Power Query is going away and talking to my online SharePoint folder, getting all the data and loading it into Power BI's Power Pivot model. What we saw in Power Query was just a preview of the data. It doesn't bring all of the data in, it just brings in a preview, and that allows it to be quite responsive when we're adding columns or filtering and the like. You can see here it's detecting relationships between the tables, and now my data is loaded. Over on the right you can see I have all my tables listed, and the first thing we need to do is look at the modeling view and make sure the relationships are all set up. So we have our 3 fact tables. Let me just move them. So we've got our 3 fact tables at the bottom and our 3 dimension tables. Let's just make that a little bigger. Okay. If I hover over the connector lines, you can see it's detected the relationship. The dimension table here is filtering down to the fact table for staff. The dimension table has the one side of the relationship, being that the sectors in that dimension table is only one record for each sector, whereas in the staff table side we've got the asterisk indicates the many side of the relationship, meaning there are many instances of the 3 types of sectors. These tables are also connected with the year. This one is year, as is this one, so they all look correct. What we need to do is relate the students table to the school sector and the states. The staff needs to be related to states, and schools needs to be related to states and dim dates. So to create the relationships, all we need to do is grab the field that we want to create the relationship between, left click and drag it up to the field on the table we want to create the relationship to. And you can see that's created that relationship. Let's do the same here for state and territory. So we're going to drop it on states. The state and territory field in the students and staff and schools table is the long version of the state name, which matches the states field here. So let's repeat that for this one. Okay, so this one has a relationship for state and territory. This one doesn't yet, so let's left click and drag. Okay, so this has 3 relationships. This has 3 relationships. This one still only has 2, so what are we missing? We've got staff and students. So the school sector in this table needs to be related to the dimension table. Okay, so we have all of our relationships set up. It looks a little bit like spaghetti junction. The next thing I want to do is set some of the formatting for the fields. So in this table here, I click on staff, and on the right here I've got my properties pane. I'm going to turn on the thousands separator, and we just want staff set to 1 decimal place. Now this is annual data, so we're going to have fractions of staff members over the year, maybe staff that work part-time or staff that have left. Let's set the formatting for students to thousands as well, and we'll round them down to no decimal places. And schools also thousands separator. Now the next thing I need to do is, when I build my visualizations, I should be using the field from the dimension tables rather than the fields from the fact tables. So where I have a field in a dimension table, I want to hide it from the report view in the fact table. So I want to do that for the year as well, and the state and territory. And you can see they're just a slightly paler grey than the other fields. So let's repeat for these fact tables, year and state and territory, and this one as well. Okay, and that will just help us use the correct fields when we're building our reports. Alright, let's take a look at the data view. Now this allows us to actually look at the table, and remember with the school sector I want to sort these based on this sort order. So on the modeling tab I'm going to sort by column, sort order, and that's just going to force these fields to be sorted based on this numeric order, and I won't need to use this field in my visuals, just this one. The next thing I need to do is give my state information a data category. So again, on the modeling tab I've selected states. I want to categorize this as a state or province, and likewise for this field. And that's going to help when I use these fields in my map visuals. Power BI is going to know that these are states, and it's going to treat them accordingly. And if we look at our field list over here, we can see the state fields now have this globe icon beside them. All right, we've done all the housekeeping, setting up work. We're ready to build our visuals. So I'm going to go to my report view. I've got a blank canvas here. I can apply filters. For now, I'm going to hide that pane. These are all my visualization tools, so my charts. These are my fields that I can work with. So let's get started. The first thing I want to do is find out the sum of students, and I can use the Ask a Question tool to tell me that. So I just type in my question, and Power BI goes away and it calculates the sum of students. It puts it in a card visual. So let's pop that up there. Right, the next one I want is a donut chart. Now, I'm not a massive fan of donut charts. I feel like they take up a huge amount of space for what they're worth, but let's go with it. So this is going to be my student information. I'm going to look at that by sector. Let's do some formatting. I'd like my detail labels to show me all of the details, so that way I can see the percentages and the values. Let's make it a bit smaller. All right, next let's insert a map. This is going to show my students based on their state. Now, it doesn't recognize my states because it's trying to use the US map. I need to change it to my Australia states, and now it correctly returns the states, the data in the states accordingly. All right, let's change some of the colors. I'm not a big fan of the red pinky color, so let's make it green through to dark green. All right, so we're cracking along. It's pretty quick to build once you get everything set up. Next is a clustered bar chart, and this is also going to have our student information by state. And we'll do a little bit of formatting. Let's make our chart have data labels. So now that we have data labels, we don't need this horizontal axis, so we'll turn off the x-axis. And we can make everything a little bit bigger here. All right, I don't want to spend too much time on formatting because that's the easy part really. All right, next is a line chart, and this I want students, and we're looking at it over time. So we need the year field. Line charts are good for data over time, and I want to look at it by sector. Let's make it a little bigger. Now, what I'd like to see is the data labels on this to help me interpret it. And again, that means I don't need my y-axis. Let's insert a matrix table. It's a bit like a pivot table. So this one we want our students over time split out by sector. Now what I'd also like to see here is the percentage of that breakdown. So let's add the students to the value field again. And I'm going to drop down, and we want to show values as percentage of row total. Now this is just like you can do in an Excel pivot table. Let's give that field a new name. We'll call it percentage of total. Okay, so that's our matrix table all set. Next we want a clustered bar chart. This is going to be our students by state and by school level. Right, let's resize this a little. Make this one a bit smaller and fit this one in here. Okay, again, the axis isn't giving us a lot of information, so let's format it with data labels, and that means we don't need our x-axis. All right, two more visuals for this dashboard. This will be a stacked column chart of students by sector and then by gender. And let's do some formatting. We'll turn our data labels on, and that means we don't need our y-axis. Okay, now I'm just going to copy this visual, Control-C to copy and paste it. I'll move it down below, and all I want to do is change it slightly. So instead of students by sector and gender, we want it by school level. So I'll remove gender and let's put school level in. So in just a few minutes, we've created our first report. So I'm going to name this one Students. And let's add one more thing. We'll add a slicer for the year. Now we can add it as different types of slices. Let's see what we can fit in here. That will do. So this allows us to slide to select the range, or we can type in a value to be precise. So now we have our dashboard. Let's just look at some of the functionality we've got available. If I click on a field or element in one of my visuals, you see all of the charts and tables respond, and they're now cross-filtered and highlighted just for that data set. So I've selected New South Wales primary. If I chose New South Wales secondary, it updates, and if I click it again, it removes all the filtering. If I click a different element, it will filter, and then if I clicked on here government, now it's just filtered for government. So these filters are not additive, it's one or the other. As you choose the next one, it removes the last. However, with the slicer, the filtering is additive. So if I had multiple slicers, as I filtered, those filters would keep being applied to the data set. So it's a little bit different there, different functionality, just depends on your needs. All right, let's move on and build the next report. I'm going to add a new sheet. This one is going to be for staff. So let's ask a question to get the sum of staff. Gives us a card visual. Let's just resize it. It's a little bit big. Okay, so that's my sum of staff. Now, one of the main things people want to know about schools is how many students are there for every teacher? So what's the average class size? And we don't have that data in our data source yet. So we need to calculate it, and we can do that with a measure. Now, a measure is just like a formula. And in Power BI, we can use our DAX formula language to write measures. And these are available in Power Pivot in Excel as well. So what I want to do is add a measure to the staff table, new measure. It's going to open up the formula bar, and in here, I can give my measure a name. So we're going to call this Students to Teachers. And the formula is going to start with the divide function, and notice the IntelliSense autocomplete appears, and I can tab to select that function. It gives me the function arguments. So the numerator is going to be the sum of students, and we want that field there. These are the fields in our table. Divided by, now the denominator, we can't count all of the staff, we only want to know the teachers. So we want to use the calculate function. So I'm going to tab to select it there. And the expression is going to be the sum of the staff. And I'm just arrowing down to select the field that I want. So that's my staff table and the column called staff. Sum of staff. And then we want to filter it for where the staff function equals teaching staff. And I'm going to close my calculate function and close the divide function and press enter. Now if we look at the staff table over here, we have a new field, and it's got the calculator icon to the left of it, and that tells me that this is an explicit measure. That is a measure I've written myself with a DAX formula. And if we compare that to the staff field here, which has the sigma sign, that's indicating to me that that's a field that can be aggregated, and Power BI will write an implicit measure for that field. It will do it itself. I don't need to write a formula. So let's add another card. This is the card visual, and we want to find that student to teacher ratio. So that's our ratio there. Let's resize it so it wraps. There we go. All right. What's next? We want a stacked bar chart, and we'll pop it up here. This is going to be our staff by sector and gender. And again, let's format it with some data labels, and that means we don't need our x-axis. The next visual I want to use is a bubble chart. So we'll click on that, and this is going to take up quite a bit of space, so we'll pop it over here. Now this is our students, staff and schools by school level, sector, and because this is a bubble chart, we have the option to add a play axis and look at this data over time. So let's use the year field in the play axis. And now if I were to filter, say, on independent and press play, you can see how the data is changing over time as it moves through the years. Pretty cool, huh? Alright, I'll remove that filter. Let's add a clustered bar chart over here. And this one is going to be our staff by function. And again, let's put some data labels on and get rid of our x-axis. Okay, then we just need a couple more line charts. So this one is our staff by year and sector. Now these two lines for Catholic and Independent are too close together to put labels on. It will just get too cluttered. So I'm not going to change that. We need one more line chart. This one is going to be our student to teacher ratio by year. Line charts are good over time, and then split out by sector, and we'll add some data labels to this, which means we don't need our y-axis. Alright, so we've built both of our reports. Let's just resize things a little. Okay, that will do for the tidying up. This one I would like to also add a slicer to for the year, so let's do that quickly and make that a year. Now this one, I'm going to change the slicer type, and you can see there's a little down arrow there, so I want to use it as a drop down. Just takes up less room, and I can squeeze it into this spot. Now there's a few cool tricks we can do in Power BI that I want to just demonstrate. So if, for example, I wanted to get a closer look at the data here, I can right click and then I can say show data, and basically it opens the chart in a new sheet and I can see the actual numbers behind these percentages, and I can continue to make changes to that and then go back to the report when I'm ready. I can also switch the orientation so that my table is on the right and my chart is on the left, or switch it back, whichever suits the data layout best. So we can go back to the report. The other thing I want to show you is the ability to see the records. So right click, see records, and this basically gives me all of the underlying transactions that relate to that field that I clicked on. So I'll go back to the report. Now the last one I want to show you here is the ability to what they call drill through. So I've got states in my data. If I wanted to go from this report with students and drill through to the staff report, I could do so, for example, based on the state, and that would then filter this report based on the state that I drilled through on. But in order to set that up, I need to set the drill through field. So we'll put states in there, and then on this sheet, now when I right click New South Wales and go drill through, I can go to the staff sheet, and you'll see that it's filtered for New South Wales. Now we can't really tell, so what we need to do is add a card for the state, and let me turn off the category label. So you can see there the state returned is New South Wales. Let's just pop that in there. That's going to help us know what we're filtered on. Now I can continue to cross-filter and highlight in this report, and it's going to remain filtered for New South Wales. If I want to go back to where I came from, I can hold down Control and click this back arrow that's been added automatically for me when I added the drill through field. So it's taken me back to my students sheet. I can choose a different state, right click, drill through, and go to staff. And now it's going to be filtered for Queensland, and we can see the state up there. So those are really good interactive tools for our users. So now that we've built these amazing dashboards, you'll want to share them with your colleagues. And one way is to simply share this Power BI desktop file in the same way you might share an Excel file. For example, you can email it or put it on a shared network drive where others can access it. Anyone who wants to open this file will also need Power BI desktop installed. Now, while this is one way to share your Power BI reports, it's not the way it was intended, because when you send someone your Power BI desktop file, they have access to all of your data and can make changes to the file. In other words, there's no security. You can't even protect these pages like you can with an Excel workbook. So the better way to share your reports is via the Power BI service. And to do this, we need to be logged into our Power BI account in Power BI Desktop. And you can see I'm logged in because my name is up here in the top right. Then on the Home tab, we simply click Publish. Yes, I should save my changes before I publish it, so let's do that. Now I just need to choose what workspace I want to publish this report to. I'm going to put it in Demos and click Select. Now it might take a few minutes depending on the size of your file and the speed of your internet connection. Once it's ready, you get a notification like we have here. We can go and open it in Power BI. So let's do that. I'm just going to refresh my Power BI window. And in my Demos group, you can see now I have a data set, which is my Power BI webinar school data. That's my PBIX file I just published. And I have reports. And you'll notice it's identical to what we were looking at in Power BI Desktop. I've got my two sheets here. I can click on a field or an element in the visuals and it will cross-filter and highlight in exactly the same way it did in Power BI Desktop. All of the functionalities here. I can even edit this report in the Power BI service. And what's happened is Power BI Desktop has published all of my data and my reports to the Power BI service in the cloud. If you've generated your report from Power BI Desktop, then I don't recommend editing it in the Power BI service because then they're going to get out of sync. It's best to go back to your Power BI Desktop report and republish it if you want to make changes like that. So in this report view, under the File menu, I can save a copy, print it, embed it in a website, SharePoint Online, or publish to the web, export to PowerPoint or PDF, or download a PBIX file, a copy of the data, and play around with it. If we want to share our reports with colleagues so they can view them in a secure environment, then we can pin this report or this live page. So click Pin Live Page, and this will create a dashboard. I can give it a name, call it School Data, and Pin Live. Now, if I go to my dashboard section, you can see I've got a dashboard there called School Data. I can create a different view that's suitable for phones. And notice that it's the same. I only see the student sheet because that's the only one I pinned. If I click on an element in the visuals, then everything cross-filters and highlights just in the same way. I just don't have any ability to edit it in this view. If I want to share this, then I simply click the share icon in the top right, enter my recipient's email address, choose their level of access, whether they're allowed to share it onwards, build new content with the underlying dataset, and give them an email notification. They'll then receive an email with the link to this dashboard. And when they click on that link, it will open in their Power BI service. So they will have that dashboard in their list of dashboards over here. And any changes that you make to the dashboard or the underlying reports it relies on, they will see that immediately as well. You can also share the reports. So at the report level, there's a share icon up here, and the process is the same, and the settings are the same. You can choose whether you allow them to make changes or not. Now I go into much more detail on sharing and security around sharing in my Power BI course. I just don't have time to go into a lot of detail now. Now there are a couple of cool features available in the Power BI service that I want to quickly show you. The first one is Quick Insights. So on the dataset, click the ellipsis and go Quick Insights. It runs a sophisticated algorithm against your dataset to find potentially interesting insights, and it's great if you're not familiar with the data or you want to discover trends, outliers, or correlations in your data that you may not have found straight away. So what we get is a series of visualizations for outliers, trends, and correlations. Not all of them are going to make sense or be useful, but you can help Power BI do a better job by naming your fields appropriately. Now, if there's one that we like, we can pin it, or we can go into focus mode. And in focus mode, we can modify the filters and make changes. And then if we're happy with that, we pin the visual, or we can go back and exit focus mode. So that's an overview of Quick Insights. I cover them in more detail in my Power BI course. Now the last feature I want to show you is called Q&A. And we use Q&A a little bit when we were building the reports in the Power BI desktop tool, but we also have it in Power BI at the dashboard level. Now it gives us some suggested questions here, or we can type in our own questions. So let's say we want to see the top 3 functions by staff. So you can see there it's given me a bar chart. I haven't even had to know how to create a visual. I've just asked a question using natural language, and Power BI has analyzed the data and extracted the relevant information, and even guessed at the type of visual that would be suitable for that data. If I wanted to see it in a different format, I could say in a pie, for example, and now it changes it to a pie chart. It also gives me options to choose a different visual here. Now, I'm sure you're wondering how easy it is to update the reports with new data. Remember, my data is stored in my SharePoint Online folder. So all I need to do is add the new files to the SharePoint folders. And because my source data is in an online SharePoint folder, it will automatically update in Power BI once per day for free accounts and up to 8 times per day for pro accounts. So you can see here my data only goes up to 2017. Let's just click on the students sheet. Same here. Let me expand this out to 2018. You'll see there's no data. It still ends at 2017, but we've just cleared the filter for the purpose of when I refresh. So let me go into my SharePoint folders, and I'm going to just add a new file for each folder. So there's my schools data for 2018. Let's go and rinse and repeat for staff. Upload a file. Get the 2018 staff file, and we'll do the same for students. Upload a file. Okay, so our data has all been uploaded. You can see the new file there. Let's go back to Power BI. I don't even need to go to Power BI desktop. And then down on the data set, I'm going to click refresh now just to force the refresh because I don't want to wait until it automatically refreshes. Gives me an error because I haven't updated my credentials, so let's do that. I want to use my OAuth, and we'll set that to none. I'll sign in quickly. Okay, so we're all set. Let's go back and refresh now, and hopefully won't get an error this time. And let's go to my report. So it hasn't been updated yet because I need to refresh the reports. And now you can see my 2018 data has been updated for all of these visuals, and it will be the same on the student sheet. Now it contains 2018 data. So happy days. I literally have just uploaded a few files to the folder and clicked 2 refresh buttons, and I'm done. So you can see maintaining these reports once they're in Power BI and you have the correct connections to your source data is dead easy. And anyone that I've shared these reports and dashboards with will also see that updated data. So there's no question that Power BI is an amazing tool, and just to be clear, everything I've shown you today has been done with the free Power BI tools available, which means you can go ahead and have a go at Power BI yourself. Now before we wrap up, there are some things I want to point out and reiterate. The visualizations and the related data set have been published to the cloud and reside in the secure Power BI service. Now this might be an issue for some companies, so I cover the alternatives in my course. If you want to share your reports and dashboards, you and those you share them with require a Power BI Pro license, which is currently US $10 per person per month. When you share a dashboard, those you share it with have access to the same reports and underlying data, but they can't save any changes unless you allow them to. The access to the underlying data allows them to dig into the data and find answers to their own questions, whether they build their own visuals or ask a question using the Q&A. If you want to restrict access to data based on a user's role, for example, you want each regional manager, or in this case maybe you have state managers, to only see their data, then you need to use row-level security, which I also cover in detail in my Power BI course, and that row-level security functionality is only available with a Pro license. Now the other thing to bear in mind for Excel users is that the same Power Query and Power Pivot tools we have in Excel are used by Power BI, as you saw. So if you already know these tools, then you're off to a head start. But if you're one of the millions of users who still has a version of Excel that's not compatible with these tools, then you don't have to miss out any longer because they come free with the Power BI desktop tool, which you can download from powerbi.com. So now you can get your Power Query and Power Pivot skills up to speed, and when your company eventually upgrades your version of Excel, you'll be way ahead of the curve. Well, I hope you enjoyed my webinar. In under an hour, I've built, I think you'll agree, 2 impressive interactive dashboards. I've published them to the Power BI service. I use quick insights to check for outliers or interesting facts about my data. I've used Q&A to ask questions of the data and had Power BI create a visualization for me without me even needing to know how to build a chart. I'm sure you'll agree it's truly amazing. Now, I've only touched the surface of what Power BI can do and how to use it. For example, I didn't need to use the Power Query or Power Pivot modeling side of Power BI much for this example, and that's because my data was already clean and ready to use. But for most of us, this is rarely the case. I mean, how often do you find yourself loading data into Excel and being able to dive straight into analyzing it in a pivot table? Not very often, I'll bet. Typically, we need to clean up our data, maybe merge data from multiple sources and add calculations and columns to it before we can even start the analysis phase. Now, we can break Power BI down into 3 main components that you need to master. They're Power Query to get and clean your data, Power Pivot to model it, and then finally the Power BI visualizations. It's clear that Power BI is a broad tool with lots of functionality to navigate. If you get some things wrong when setting up your model and reports, then it can be difficult to undo them, and there are loads of settings to control who can see what and other fine-tuning that can be applied, which is why I put together a course for it. So if you want to get up to speed with Power BI quickly and follow a logical process for learning all about it, including the Power Query and Power Pivot tools, then I recommend you take a few minutes to check out my online Power BI course. Well, that's it from me and Power BI for now. I hope you're excited about this amazing tool. If you have any questions, be sure to email me at website@myonlinetraininghub.com. Thanks for your time.